In this video, I'd like to walk you through a project that's been a favourite of mine for a long time. It's a stepladder. Hi, I'm Colin. This project is not fine woodworking. It's not very technological, and there are countless variations of this product online and all over YouTube. But this project is special because I've made hundreds of these with students over the years, and it's always popular. I used to make this with 10th grade students, thinking that it would be too complex for the younger years. But I was wrong about that. Eventually I found that even 7th grade students could make this very successfully, albeit with a bit of extra preparation. What makes this design special is the compound angle, meaning that it leans forward and then it tapers towards the top. Now I've seen lots of designs where the two stringers don't taper, in fact they're basically parallel. But this design is way more challenging. I should also say that this isn't my design. I was first shown how to make this in the year 2000 as a quick and functional project for a class of mine by a very skilled woodworker. This run through is going to be very high level so that the video doesn't become too long. Hopefully you'll be able to get enough detail to give this a go yourself. I'll leave some chapter markers in the description below to help you step through the process. I'm using 19mm pine for the whole job, 89mm wide for the stringers, 140mm wide for the back, top and treads, and 42mm wide for the back frame. It's clear grade, which means I don't have to deal with too many knots or imperfections, and it's really easy to get a hold of at your local hardware store, and it also doesn't need much finishing. Now you can make this job as difficult or as easy as you like, depending on your preparation. You can see here that I've pre-cut the pieces using a powered saw with the angles ready to go. In fact, the whole job revolves around two angles. 22.5 degrees for the lean forward and 7 degrees for the taper, which means you're going to be using a sliding bevel pretty much most of the time, with only a tiny appearance being made by your tri-square. Normally you'd use a drop saw for preparing the materials, but I'm using a track saw and an MFT table. First, we'll start with the stringers. They're 700mm long with a 22.5 degree angle on each end. And in addition, each end is cut with a 7-degree angle so that when they stand up, they lean in towards each other. A helpful thing to keep in mind when marking out and working on the job is that the pieces always create an arrow shape when both flat and when on edge. This ensures that you're always looking at the job the right way around. To mark out the treads, I've set the sliding bevel to the 22.5 degree angle on the base of the stringer. Then slide the bevel up the stringer and mark a line for the top of the tread. Markings here need to be completely symmetrical across both sides of the ladder. Keeping the arrow shape in mind here will help keep your markings symmetrical. Each tread will be cut into the stringer with a through housing joint. I've got a small offcut here with the 7-degree angle cut on the end to simulate where the tread will be and to mark the underside. Using the angle on the end of the stringer, I'll set my bevel to 7 degrees and use this to mark out the through housing. This bit can be, well, a bit tricky. Students normally make projects with 90 degrees through housings. This angle just adds a little bit of challenge when cutting and chiseling. Using a marking gauge, I'll mark a 6mm depth. And there's the through housing, running at 22.5 degrees across the face and 7 degrees across the edge. To check you've done this correctly, put the inward faces of the stringers together and see if you get that familiar arrow shape on the markings of the through housing. Now, to cut the trenches, be sure to hold your tenon saw on an angle because the walls of the trench are at 7 degrees. This is really tricky, and you'll most likely need to fix this with some fine chisel work. Using the offcut, check for fit. The width of the trench here is good, but there's a bump in the middle. A bit more chiseling, and now it slides nicely, with a good snug fit. I'm quite happy with that. Repeating that for all 4 trenches, you can then check that they all match up. Otherwise, your step treads won't be horizontal. The step treads will be glued and screwed into the stringers. For this, I'll be using 10 gauge by 40mm screws. Before I drill any holes and glue anything together, I'll just make sure that it all fits. And don't forget that I'll need to plane off the back of each tread to match the angle of the ladder. That way I get a nice flush finish on the back. I've drilled a 5mm clearance hole for each screw and countersunk each one. Then apply enough glue to get really good coverage. Carefully drive in each screw, but not fully tight. You'll need to tighten up each screw by hand to avoid the ladder pulling out of shape too much. Then, using your sliding bevel, check that the angle is the same on each side. It will most likely be out by just a little bit. I'm using a long quick clamp here to pull the ladder into square, so to speak, so that the angle is the same on both sides. And then I'll let the glue dry. With the glue dry and the ladder nice and symmetrical, I can attach the back plate and the top tread. Once again, the back plate will also need to have an edge planed to match the angle of the ladder. Make sure you apply plenty of glue and screw the back plate onto the stringers. The same goes for the top tread. Plenty of glue, and ensure that you drive the screws in evenly first and then come back and tighten them up. This minimises any slippiness. And there you have it. The front section of the ladder is complete. Moving on to the back frame, a key thing to remember here is that you make this on the back of the ladder so that you get the sizing and the angles just right. That's because even though each ladder is made to the same specification, they're all just a bit unique. The back frame is made of half-lap joints that need to match the angle of the ladder. Therefore, you'll be using your sliding bevel to mark them out, as well as your tri-square. To make this challenging for students, you can get them to cut the angles with a tenon saw, but I'm going to make this easy on myself. I'm using my track saw. With two nice-fitting long sections, I can now cut the top cross-section with the angled ends and make sure it all fits. The same applies for the bottom cross-section, and this is normally sized so that it's about 100 to 110mm from the base of the leg. You'll notice that I've left that a little bit long here too, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. The top cross-section is a full corner half-lap with sections from both pieces removed. And here you can also see that the joint is angled and not 90 degrees. If you do this with a tri-square, it just won't work. The lower cross-section is only lapped onto the legs to maintain a bit more strength and thickness in the joint. Now before I glue and screw this together, I need to trim the legs. To do that, I'll need to use the sliding bevel to follow the angles around the end. And again, this can also be tricky, so spend some time getting this right. Otherwise the legs won't sit flat on the floor. Then drill and countersink the holes and lay the frame out flat to check for any twist or unevenness. Then glue and screw the frame together whilst it's resting on the back of the ladder. This is essential to get the angles just right. You can see here I've clamped the piece to the ladder to maintain the correct alignment. Once it's all glued and screwed, keep the clamps on whilst the glue dries. Sometimes you can get a tiny bit of the screw to stick out the other side of the top corner half-lap joints. Slightly more depth here can be a good thing. However, make sure that you file off any tiny little points that are sticking out on the other side. Now I'll give the frame a quick sand before fixing the hinges to join it to the steps. I'm using very simple 50mm butt hinges for this job. There are small countersinks on the hinges, but you can see that my screws won't fit terribly well, so I'm going to use these wafer head screws instead. That also gives the screw head a nice firm contact with the hinge. And that looks pretty good. To support and tension the frame, I'm using 8mm sash cord. It's easy to work with and gives the job a nice detail. I'll need to drill holes in the back frame and the stringers. You can see here I'm using a piece of sacrificial melamine to avoid any nasty breakout during the drilling, just to keep the holes nice and clean. When positioning the ladder to thread the cord, make sure that you preset the angle so that the legs aren't quite flat on the bench. This gives you a bit of play so that the legs eventually end up flat as the knots continue to tighten. A simple double knot will work here. Then pull the cord through a bit and trim off the end. A quick blow with a chisel usually does the trick. Repeat this for the other side and then check for overall tension. Remember, it will continue to tighten up a bit for the first few uses. I'm keeping the sanding super simple for this job. The timber was very smooth to begin with, being clear grade. I'm just removing some surface blemishes and sharp edges. Now, is it strong enough? Well, it seems to hold my weight quite well. You can see here that the legs do end up sitting flat as the cord stretches a bit. How much weight does it hold? Well, I'm not exactly sure. It depends, of course, on how well it's been made and the materials chosen. I'd say it's adequate for light-duty use around the house. Now, I weigh 85 kilos, and I've been using this one here for just over 20 years. In fact, this is the first one I made after being shown how to make it. Like I said, this isn't my design, but this one here is still going strong. So if you're looking for something that's practical and just a little bit challenging, you might like to give something like this a go. Or you might like to improve it. Oh, and just one more thing, the finish. At this point, it's just raw pine. Now, I really don't want to give it a clear finish because that's just a bit, well, plain, and it reminds me too much of a school project. I think I'd rather use an oil or wax finish, or maybe even paint it. I used a bit of leftover stain and varnish for this one, and you can see it's developed what you might call a nice patina over the years. Not sure about this one, the one that I've just made. Let me know in the comments how you'd finish it. What am I going to do with two of these? Anyway, I hope you got value out of that and enjoyed watching that process. I know I enjoyed making it, again. So thanks for watching, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.